Did you ever take any performance enhancers, Mike?
I take fucking I did marijuana.
Yeah. Well, talk about that, Jeff, because you're actually an advocate for CBD, and you guys, I think, have one of the most forward-thinking policies on it, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, so it was like last year, the year before, CBD became allowed to take at all times. So our fighters can take it, without restriction anytime. Great. Marijuana or THC only tested for in the in-competition period, which would be weigh-in day or fight day.
You said something earlier that I thought was interesting on the THC side of things, which is there is a threshold.
It's 150 nanograms per milliliter. Now, that may not mean much to the non-scientists, but, it's probably what we recommend to our fighters is if you stop using it, the problem is everybody metabolizes differently. So I'd hate to tell, Mike's one of our fighters says, hey, Jeff, when should I stop, using? And I tell him a week. He just happens to metabolize differently and he pops, then it's on me. So I'm always, out of an abundance of caution, giving them a little longer window. But the reality is, a week or two likely would, put you under that limit. I'd love to see something, along the lines of, like alcohol. I mean, you're not allowed to be drunk to go in and box or fight MMA, but you're not testing for alcohol.
Listen,
you've got inspectors in the locker room.
There's been fighters that did it. They can't fight without drinking. They got to be drunk to fight. They don't got the nerve. They don't have the nerve. They got to be drunk. Yeah. World champion. They got to be drunk. Can't do this shit, nigga, without no motherfucking alcohol. I'm my right-handed guard.
Yeah. I've seen guys take shots of alcohol.
Frankie Randall, world champion, beat Chavez. First guy to beat Chavez. Chavez had a record like 89-0. The first guy to beat an alcoholic.
Wow.
So while we have a threshold, and this is an interesting story, I found this out yesterday and connection here to Mike. So while we have this threshold, so you can have some in your system, it just can't be over an amount. Some states where we go, the athletic commissions have rules where you can have none. And you know whose state still has a no tolerance rule?
No.
Where did you test positive for marijuana?
From Detroit.
Michigan.
Really?
We still go to Michigan, and they don't allow 1 ounce or iota of THC or marijuana, which is fucking ridiculous. You could smoke a joint a month before the fight and still have some in your system.
They do that because they want to collect the money. It's all financial.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a little of that. It may just them trying to, impose their moral issues
They're very
on.
intelligent. They're not ignorant people.
There's no place in an anti-doping program. In an anti-doping program, you're trying to create a fair and level playing field. What difference does it make if somebody, smokes something a month out? What difference, in my opinion, does it make if someone's nervous and can't sleep the night before a competition and uses some marijuana to just relax himself and sleep?
The guy got me nervous. He's really big and shit, and he got me nervous.
That's not giving you an advantage the next night when you're going to fight. It
should be debilitating, if anything,
So fighters are they tested the day of the fight?
So they can be tested the day of the fight, the night of the fight, the day, but they can be tested any time. It's okay.
They normally test you like a week before you fight. They do the AIDS test and all that stuff. Normally a week before the fight.
Yeah, that's for the commission for medical purposes to make sure hepatitis, AIDS, those types of things. For our testing, the anti-doping testing, are the UFC fighters subject to a test 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. They never know.
They should always be afraid to take the AIDS test too.
You do that before every test, or before every fight. You do an AIDS test?
Hell yeah. And listen. So next thing, right? I'm at a fight, and so Tommy the Duke Morrison's about to fight. He's the main event. And then a doctor who's a friend of mine come in and say, nah, he's not fighting tonight, and I don't think he's ever going to fight again. And I'm saying, like, wow, he must really be hurt or something, right? But they said, no, Mike, you'll find out. He didn't want to tell me right there. He said, no, we're going to find out. But he already knew, and he found the guy had HIV. And they canceled his fight, the main event.
Wow. And
I'm like, fuck, if he got it, I know he don't get more pussy than me and don't do shit that I do. I'm like, fuck, I'm dead.
I'm dead.
Fuck.
Oh, shit. That's crazy, Mike.
Fuck, man.
Jeff, we have fun here, man.
This is awesome.
We have fun.
I love it.
But you said something interesting earlier as well about how THC, the concern is that maybe having THC in your system during the fight could help you endure more damage.
That's at least the theory. I mean, I don't know whether there's weight to that because I'm not a fighter, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
Listen, I know this, right? This is what I know. I know if three of us all had altercations with one another and we put some liquor in this room, we'll kill each other. You know? And I know if we all had altercation and we started smoking some weed, we'll all start taking selfies with one another and shit, right? Say, man, fuck that shit. I love you, man. That shit was bullshit. You know, I used to know that because I've been in that situation. I saw what the effects of both of them do. And that's all I know from that perspective.
But how would it relate to you competing, to fighting another human being? How do you
Mike
think?
has an interesting story about it.
Like what you say, if I'm smoking weed?
Yeah. Do you think it would help you? Do you think it would help with
100%,
anxiety?
Yeah.
Like
100%. But listen, that's why I smoked, because I was a little too paranoid the night before, so I smoked the night before just to get some rest and cool out.
Yeah.
You know, I believed it helped me. I was relaxing to fight the fight. I broke the guy's eye socket, his cheekbone, his back, his rib, because he turned around when I was throwing a punch. And I was calm, relaxed.
Yeah.
You know, and it was I don't know, it was really soothing.
Yeah.
Really
I mean, that's the same story I get from our fighters, absolutely. But I just, and it's interesting because I've had talks with the Nevada State Athletic Commission, Bob Bennett, who's their executive director. He's just like me, former federal agent. And, you know, I think they've had some preliminary discussions about, hey, why don't we just get rid of marijuana to be tested altogether? I mean, it's legal in Nevada, so there's no.
Because you notice, this is when it's really bad. Listen, this is when it gets bad. Listen, when it comes to drug tests, you know, we can all beat cocaine. We can all beat cocaine drug testing. You have to stay away from it for 3 days or so. We could beat that, right? But for weed, we got 45 days.
Yeah.
We got to wait 45 days in our system. And I think it stays in our system because it belongs there. Weed comes out, cocaine comes out because it doesn't belong there. Our body's trying to get rid of it. You know?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Interesting theory, dude.
Yeah.
No, that's real stuff. We try to get rid of that
Well,
shit.
we produce them to do different things in our bodies anyway. Endogenous cannabinoids that help us with our appetite and our sleep rhythms and our mood.
This
and
makes
pain.
us hungry. We do some cocaine, nigga, we shut down. Boom. All of our senses shut down. We don't hear nothing. We don't see nothing. It's all illusions and shit. We don't hear shit, see shit, and we on some fucking energy we don't even know about.
Yeah.
I don't care about nobody. I don't care about nobody.
In terms of things that aren't supposed to be in your body, I think this is real hypocritical in the world of anti-doping is Xanax, Ambien, some of the opioids, we talked about this earlier, are allowed, but you can't use a little marijuana the night before a fight to sleep. I mean, that's flat out wrong. Yeah. I think.
Absolutely. I mean, do you think...
What's the concept? Why do we think that way? Find out why is it the greatest thinkers in that particular field? Why do they think that way?
Well, you were at the FDA,
I was just going to bring that up. Coming from the federal government, as it comes to those things, I think the answer is Big Pharma. I think the interest that Big Pharma has in these synthetic drugs and how much money that they make for these Big Pharma companies, the influence that Big Pharma has over lawmakers, they see marijuana as, potential roadblock to their earnings potential, right?
Well, listen,
I think.
Yeah.
I've done almost every drug I can think of, Instead of probably, did I do crack? I smoked crack before, it just didn't affect me. I did smoke meth before, it just didn't fuck. It wasn't my thing. It just didn't affect me, right? I didn't like it. It wasn't my stuff, right? I did the Toad, right? And changed my whole perspective on life and drugs and all that shit. It just changed everything I ever thought about drugs. It made me say drugs ain't shit if it's not like this. If you can't make me feel like this, then I can't use you anymore. So what do you do with a drug like that? What do you do with a drug like the Toad? Why is the Toad illegal? That's the closest thing to make you have an engagement with God.
Do you know
in my perspective?
Do you know about 5-MeO DMT or DMT or
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure. I guess DMT is a Schedule 1.
It is a Schedule 1, but speaking of Schedule 1, how the hell is marijuana in the same category as crack cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin?
How did it even?
Are you kidding me?
How did that even work out?
Look, I'm not sitting here a proponent of everybody go out and use marijuana or drugs, but when looking at people with medical conditions, physical conditions, psychological conditions, and given a choice between a purely synthetic drug that's processed by the liver through the kidneys versus a natural plant where there's no evidence of that type of toxicity, I just don't get it. It's so, it's so
Nixon,
backward.
right?
What's that?
It's Nixon.
Nixon, yeah, created the DEA in 1973. And look, I was in the front lines of the war on drugs in America. It's not working.
Yeah.
Listen,
We're 45 years into it.
this is what it is. It's no end to it. It's no end to drugs and cocaine and acid and all that shit and method. There's no end to that. That's never going to end.
Never.
It's going to be here when our great grandkids die. It's never going anywhere.
Yeah.
We
I agree.
create it. We make it. The toad is natural. All this shit is natural. We make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and there's good, intelligent people that I've worked with that are working it, so it's not for lack of effort, but just the demand is too high. And you took a quarter of that money and put it into education, rehab for those that needed it and developed the problem, and I think you have a much better society than what you do now. I talk about prison overpopulation with nonviolent drug offenders. I mean, marijuana being a Schedule I drug, there's instances where if you sell enough of it, you could be facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I think society is realizing that that's ridiculous, and that's why we're getting easier on the marijuana laws.
I think we're getting there. I agree with you.
You know, I believe it's just an overwhelming call for a change, and I think it's just going to be, it's a no-brainer and they have to give in. It's almost like when the Christians became legalized religion. It was so much they just couldn't stop it. What's his name? Constantine. He had to turn Christian. It was overcoming him. It was crushing him and his children and his children's children. And he couldn't stop it, so we had to make that a religion of the country.
That was in Rome?
No, Constantinople. What is that?
Oh, Constantine.
What is that? Turkey. Originally, yeah.
Yeah. Mike's a history guy too, man.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And when you think about marijuana in a form, it's like religion. It's a form of religion, marijuana.
Absolutely.
You know?
There are people who actually have a religion about it.
What are their names? They're not the Rastafarians, are they?
Well, the Rastafarians, I think cannabis is a big part of their culture, but it's not like a centerpiece.
Yeah, it's not the essence
These
of it.
people, actually, it's like a centerpiece of their culture. I told you about that tribe in Africa, the Dogon tribe, who have a yearly cannabis celebration. And they believe that this ancient alien race from the Sirius stars came down and brought cannabis to it. Sirius are the dog stars. There's two of them, A and B. Cannabis means two dogs. So they have all these cave paintings about people from the heavens coming down to the earth and giving them this plant because it will bring them peace. And so, I mean, there are people that are fucking
Into it.
Yeah. Well, it is that, though. You know, I think that there's an intelligence to all this plant life, you know, and somehow in our Western culture, we've convinced ourselves that we know better and that we can create something better in a lab that's safer, or at least that's become profitable. So that's the direction it's gone, you know?
I mean, I always try to look at it, it's just because of my world, from a sport perspective. And the reality is, you know, MMA, the UFC, is probably one of the most physically grueling, damaging to your body over, you know, short and long-term sports out there. And, you know, again, I'm not a proponent of everybody going out and using things, but when you have certain conditions, you're in pain all the time, and you look at the alternatives that are out there, synthetic, man-made, toxic to the liver, kidney, versus a plant, that, you know, I think it's unquestioned that, you know, probably it doesn't have a lot of the addictive properties that an opioid would, certainly. And that there's no evidence that I've ever found of toxicity. Man, it sure seems to me like.
Are there more reasonable people like you, Jeff, in the FDA and the DEA?
They have to do, but their hands are tied.
Yeah, I struggle with that a lot. I mean, you're tasked to enforce the laws of this country, many of which you may not agree with. And, you know, it was tough, definitely.
I guess you have to be the kind of person to take that job, right?
True. I mean, there's, like in every walk of life, there's all kinds of law enforcement agents, officers. The majority, in my opinion, with working them are really good people. There's some that aren't.